It was a regular Tuesday morning when David stepped into the fancy clothing store downtown. He had just finished his workout at the gym and decided to grab some new dress shirts for an important business meeting coming up next week. Nothing unusual about that, right? Just a man doing some shopping. David was 42 years old and had worked incredibly hard to build his real estate business from the ground up. He owned several commercial properties across the city, including shopping plexes, office buildings, and apartment complexes. But looking at him that morning, you wouldn't guess any of that. He was wearing his comfortable gray hoodie, black joggers, and sneakers. Just regular gym clothes. Sometimes successful people don't walk around in three-piece suits, you know. The store he walked into was one of those upscale boutiques that sold designer clothes with price tags that could make your eyes water. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and soft classical music played in the background. Everything was neatly arranged on expensive-looking wooden shelves and racks, the kind of place where even the air felt expensive. As soon as David walked in, he noticed something off. The store manager, a woman in her late 30s with blonde hair tied up in a tight bun, looked up from behind the counter. Her eyes locked onto him and her expression changed immediately. It wasn't a welcoming smile or a friendly, "Hello, how can I help you today?" No, it was something else entirely. Suspicion. That look that said, "What are you doing here?" David had seen that look before. Too many times, actually. It was the kind of look that made your stomach tighten, even when you knew you had done absolutely nothing wrong. But he was used to it by now. After years of dealing with assumptions based on how he looked, he had developed thick skin. He simply nodded politely and started browsing through the racks of shirts. The store manager whispered something to her young assistant, a girl who couldn't have been more than 23. David couldn't hear exactly what was being said, but he caught a few words. "Watch him" and "suspicious" were among them. The assistant glanced nervously in his direction and then quickly looked away. David moved slowly through the store, running his fingers along the fabric of different shirts. He picked up a navy blue dress shirt with mother-of-pearl buttons and checked the size. It was nice quality, exactly what he needed. He draped it over his arm and continued looking. Behind him, he could feel eyes boring into his back. The manager was following his every move, pretending to organize merchandise but really just keeping track of where he was and what he was touching. It was uncomfortable, to say the least. The other customers in the store, mostly well-dressed women in their 40s and 50s, started noticing the tension too. They glanced between David and the manager, sensing something was wrong. David tried to ignore it all. He had come here to buy shirts, and that's exactly what he planned to do. He walked over to a glass display case that housed luxury watches and accessories. There was a beautiful silver watch with a black leather band that caught his eye. It would go perfectly with the new shirts he was planning to buy. He leaned down slightly to get a better look at the watch, his hands in his pockets. The price tag read $3,000. Expensive, sure, but David could afford it without thinking twice. His real estate investments had been doing very well lately, and he had closed a major deal just last month that netted him a healthy profit. But as he stood there admiring the watch, the store manager suddenly appeared beside him. Her perfume was strong, almost overwhelming, and her face was set in a hard expression. This was it. David could feel the confrontation coming before she even opened her mouth. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp and unfriendly. "Can I help you with something?" The way she said it made it clear she wasn't really offering help. It was more like an accusation disguised as a question. David straightened up and turned to face her. "Yes, actually," he replied calmly. "I'd like to take a closer look at that watch when you have a moment. And I'll also take this shirt." He held up the navy blue shirt he had been carrying. The manager crossed her arms over her chest. "That watch is very expensive," she said slowly, as if speaking to a child. "Are you sure you're in the right store?" David felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice level. "I'm sure. I'd just like to see the watch, please." "Do you even know how much these items cost?" She pressed on, her eyes narrowing. "This isn't a discount store. Everything here is designer quality." Other customers were openly staring now. An older woman in a cream-colored pantsuit had stopped mid-browse to watch the exchange. A younger couple near the entrance whispered to each other, their phones already in their hands. David took a slow breath. "Stay calm," he told himself. "Don't give them a reason to escalate this." "I understand that," he said quietly. "I can afford it. Now may I please see the watch?" But the manager wasn't backing down. In fact, she seemed to be getting more agitated. Her face was turning slightly red and her voice was getting louder. "Look," she said, stepping closer to him. "I don't know what you're trying to do here, but this store has a certain clientele, a certain standard, and quite frankly, I don't think you belong here." The words hung in the air like poison. David felt his heart pounding in his chest, but he refused to show any emotion. He had learned long ago that showing anger or frustration would only make things worse. People were already making assumptions about him. Getting upset would just confirm whatever stereotypes they had in their heads. "I'm a customer," David said firmly, "and I have every right to shop here just like anyone else." The manager let out an exasperated sigh. "You're not shopping. You're loitering, and you're making my other customers uncomfortable." That was a lie, and they both knew it. The only person making anyone uncomfortable was the manager herself, with her hostile attitude and raised voice. But she didn't care about the truth. She had already decided who David was and what he was doing there, and nothing he said was going to change her mind. David reached for his wallet in his back pocket. "Let me show you my credit card," he offered. "Then maybe you'll understand that I'm a serious customer." But before he could even pull out his wallet, the manager held up her hand. "I don't care what cards you have," she snapped. "They're probably stolen anyway. I want you out of my store now." The accusation hit David like a slap. Stolen? She was actually accusing him of being a thief without a shred of evidence. Without any reason except for how he looked and what he was wearing. "I'm not leaving," David said quietly. "I haven't done anything wrong." The manager's eyes flashed with anger. "Fine," she hissed. "Then I'll call someone who can make you leave." She turned on her heel and marched toward the back office, her shoes clicking loudly against the polished floor. David stood there, the blue shirt still draped over his arm, wondering how a simple shopping trip had turned into this nightmare. Around him, the other customers whispered and stared. Some looked sympathetic, others looked nervous, and a few looked like they agreed with the manager's assessment. David's phone buzzed in his pocket, but he ignored it. He wasn't going to give the manager the satisfaction of seeing him leave voluntarily. He had done nothing wrong. Absolutely nothing. And he wasn't about to be driven out of a store in a building that he actually owned, though nobody there knew that yet. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on him. Here he was, being treated like a criminal in his own property. But David decided to wait and see what would happen next. He had a feeling things were about to get a lot worse before they got better, and he was absolutely right. The store manager disappeared into her office, and David could see her through the glass door, pacing back and forth while talking on the phone. Her free hand waved in the air dramatically as she spoke, clearly describing him to whoever was on the other end of the line. David had a sinking feeling about where this was headed. He looked around the store, making eye contact with a few of the customers. One woman, probably in her 60s with kind eyes, gave him a small sympathetic smile. At least someone understood how ridiculous this situation was. But most people just looked away quickly, pretending to be interested in clothes they had probably already seen 100 times. The young assistant, the girl who had been warned to watch him, stood awkwardly behind the counter. She kept glancing, between David and the office where her boss was on the phone. You could see the conflict on her face. Part of her seemed to know this was wrong, but she wasn't brave enough to speak up. David didn't blame her. Jobs were hard to come by, and standing up to your boss could cost you everything. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. David remained standing near the watch display case, refusing to move. The shirt was still draped over his arm. He wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing him run away like he had something to hide. Because he didn't. He had absolutely nothing to hide. His phone buzzed again. This time he checked it. It was a message from Raymond, his property manager, asking about their meeting later that afternoon. David typed a quick response saying he might be a few minutes late and to go ahead and start without him if needed. He had no idea just how late he was going to be. The office door swung open and the manager emerged with a triumphant look on her face. She walked straight past David without even looking at him, went to the front door and locked it. Then she flipped the sign from open to closed. "What are you doing?" asked one of the customers, a woman holding an armful of dresses. "I haven't checked out yet." "I'm sorry," the manager said, though she didn't sound sorry at all. "We're closing early today. There's been a security situation." "A security situation?" David almost laughed at how absurd this was. He was standing there holding a shirt, minding his own business, and somehow he had become a security situation. The customers quickly made their way to the checkout counter, clearly wanting to leave before whatever was about to happen actually happened. The young assistant rang them up with shaking hands, apologizing quietly as she bagged their purchases. Within 5 minutes, the store was empty except for David, the manager, and the nervous assistant. The manager stood by the door with her arms crossed, staring at David like he was some kind of dangerous animal. "The police are on their way," she announced proudly. "They'll remove you from the premises." "I'm a customer," David repeated, his voice still calm despite the anger building inside him. "I was trying to buy this shirt and look at a watch. That's all." "You're a trespasser," the manager shot back, "and probably a thief casing the store. I've seen people like you before. People like you." Those 4 words carried so much weight, so much prejudice and assumption. David knew exactly what she meant by people like you. It had nothing to do with his behavior and everything to do with the color of his skin. "You don't know anything about me," David said quietly. "You've made assumptions based on how I look and you're completely wrong," the manager scoffed. "I know enough. You walk in here dressed like a homeless person touching expensive merchandise, loitering around the most valuable items in the store. What else am I supposed to think? Maybe you're supposed to think I'm a customer who just came from the gym and wants to buy some clothes," David suggested. "Maybe you're supposed to treat everyone who walks through that door with basic respect and dignity." "Respect is earned," the manager snapped. "And you haven't earned anything." David shook his head in disbelief. "This is unbelievable. I've literally done nothing but shop. Nothing. You're making my employees uncomfortable. You're disrupting my business." "Your employees are uncomfortable because you're creating a hostile environment," David countered. "And you're the one who closed the store and called the police. I'm the one who's been disrupted." The assistant, still standing behind the counter, looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. David caught her eye for a moment and she quickly looked down at her hands. "Did I do something to make you uncomfortable?" David asked her directly. "Did I threaten you in any way? Touch anything inappropriately? Say anything offensive?" The girl's mouth opened slightly, but before she could answer, the manager cut in sharply. "Don't talk to her. You don't get to interrogate my staff." "I'm not interrogating anyone," David said. "I'm just trying to understand what I supposedly did wrong." "You exist in a space where you don't belong," the manager said coldly. Those words hung in the air, revealing the ugly truth behind this entire confrontation. This wasn't about David's behavior, or his clothing, or his intentions. This was about the manager's own prejudices and her belief that certain people belonged in certain places and others didn't. David felt exhausted suddenly, not physically tired, but emotionally drained. He had dealt with this kind of thing so many times throughout his life. The suspicious looks when he walked into nice restaurants, the security guards who followed him around department stores, the real estate agents who assumed he was looking to rent rather than buy, the bank officers who seemed surprised when he talked about his investment portfolio. No matter how successful he became, no matter how much wealth he accumulated, no matter how many properties he owned, there were still people who looked at him and saw only what they wanted to see, only what their prejudices told them to see. He thought about leaving, just walking out and taking his business elsewhere. It would be easier, less confrontational. He could go to any one of a dozen other stores and buy what he needed without this drama. But something made him stay. Maybe it was principle. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the knowledge that if he left now, the manager would feel vindicated in her actions. She would tell herself that she had been right all along, that he really was suspicious, that her instincts were correct. And she would do the same thing to the next person who walked in looking different from her usual clientele, and the next, and the next. So David stayed. He stood his ground, the blue shirt still over his arm, and waited for the police to arrive. He pulled out his phone and started recording, holding it up so the camera captured the entire store. "What are you doing?" the manager demanded. "Documenting," David replied simply. "If I'm going to be accused of crimes I didn't commit, I want evidence of what really happened here." The manager's face went slightly pale, but she tried to maintain her confident demeanor. Fine. Record whatever you want. It'll just prove that I was right to call the police. David didn't respond. He just kept the camera rolling, making sure to capture the locked door, the closed sign, and the manager's hostile expression. In today's world, video evidence was everything. Without it, this would just be his word against hers, and he knew whose word the police would probably believe. Outside, he could hear a siren getting closer. His heart rate picked up despite his calm exterior. He had dealt with police before in situations like this, and it never went well. Even when you were completely innocent, even when you cooperated fully, there was always that underlying tension, that fear that things could escalate quickly and dangerously. He took a deep breath and reminded himself to stay calm. Keep your hands visible, speak respectfully. Don't make any sudden movements. Follow instructions. These were the rules he had learned over the years, the rules that every black parent taught their children, the rules that shouldn't have to exist but did. The siren stopped right outside the store. Through the window, David could see the police car pulling up to the curb. 2 officers got out, adjusting their belts and putting on their hats. They looked at the store, saw the closed sign, and one of them knocked on the door. The manager rushed to unlock it, her face suddenly all concerned and worried. "Officers, thank God you're here. He's right there." She pointed at David like he was some kind of dangerous criminal caught in the act. The officers entered, and immediately their eyes locked onto David. Not on the manager who had called them, not on the assistant who was a witness to everything, just on David. "Sir, we're going to need you to put the phone down," one of the officers said. He was a tall man, probably in his early 40s, with a thick mustache and hard eyes. "I'm recording for my own protection," David said calmly. "I have the right to record this interaction." "Put the phone down," the officer repeated, his hand moving slightly toward his belt. David's mouth went dry, but he kept his voice steady. "Am I being detained? Am I under arrest? What crime am I suspected of committing?" "We'll get to that," the second officer said. He was younger, maybe late 20s, with nervous energy about him. "Right now, we need you to comply with our instructions." David could feel the situation spiraling. This was how things went wrong. This was how peaceful interactions turned into headlines and hashtags. He slowly lowered his phone but kept the recording running, holding it at his side where the camera could still capture audio. "I'm cooperating," he said clearly. "I'm unarmed. I'm calm. I just want everyone to understand that I've done nothing wrong." The 2 police officers stood just inside the doorway, sizing up the situation. Officer Rodriguez, the older one with the mustache, kept his eyes fixed on David, while his partner, Officer Chen, listened to the store manager's rapid-fire explanation of events. From where David stood, he could see other people gathering outside on the sidewalk, peering through the store windows to see what was happening. "He came in acting suspicious from the start," the manager was saying, her voice taking on a trembling quality that hadn't been there before, "following me around, touching expensive items, making me feel very uncomfortable. When I asked him to leave, he became aggressive and refused." David felt his blood pressure rising but forced himself to remain calm. "That's not true," he said firmly but without raising his voice. "I came in to buy shirts for a business meeting. I never followed anyone. I browsed the merchandise like any normal customer. And I never became aggressive. She's the one who approached me and made accusations." Officer Rodriguez held up a hand. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stop talking for a moment." "But she's lying about what happened," David protested. "You can ask the assistant. She saw everything." All eyes turned to the young assistant behind the counter. The girl looked absolutely terrified, her face pale and her hands gripping the edge of the counter. The manager shot her a warning look. "Tell them," the manager said to her employee, her voice carrying an unspoken threat. "Tell them how uncomfortable he made us feel." The assistant's eyes darted between David and her boss. Her mouth opened and closed several times. You could see the internal struggle happening in real time. Finally, she spoke in a barely audible whisper. I don't know. It all happened so fast." "She knows," the manager insisted. She saw him lurking around, touching things. "Tell them." David felt sorry for the girl. She was stuck between telling the truth and keeping her job. In the end, survival won out. She nodded weakly. looking at the watches for a long time. Looking at watches in a store is not a crime, David said, his frustration starting to show despite his best efforts. This is insane. I'm a customer. A paying customer who hasn't done anything wrong. Officer Chen, the younger one, stepped forward. Sir, do you have any identification on you? Of course I do, David replied. Can I reach for my wallet? Slowly, Rodriguez said, his hand hovering near his weapon in a way that made David's heart race. David moved in slow motion, reaching around to his back pocket and pulling out his leather wallet. He opened it and took out his driver's license, holding it out for the officers to see. Officer Chen took it and examined it carefully. David Johnson, Chen read aloud. Address on Maple Street. Is that current? Yes, that's my home address, David confirmed. What are you doing in this part of town? Rodriguez asked. David blinked in confusion. What do you mean? I'm shopping. Is there a law against shopping in certain neighborhoods? Just answer the question, sir, Rodriguez said sternly. I work in the area, David explained, trying to keep the exasperation out of his voice. I own several properties downtown. I come here all the time. The manager let out a disbelieving laugh. He says he owns properties, right, and I'm the Queen of England. David turned to look at her. You know what? You actually work in one of my buildings. This entire shopping complex is mine. I own it. Dead silence fell over the store. The manager's smug expression faltered for just a second before she recovered. That's ridiculous. He's lying to get out of trouble. I'm not lying, David said firmly. My company, Johnson Properties LLC, owns this entire building. I have documentation to prove it. Officer Chen exchanged a glance with his partner. Do you have that documentation with you? It's in my car, David said, along with my business cards, contracts, and plenty of other proof. Or you could just call my property manager. Her name is Linda Torres. She handles all the leasing for this building, including the lease for this very store. The manager's face was turning an interesting shade of red. This is absurd. He's making all of this up. Probably Googled the property owner and is now pretending to be him. Ma'am, we'll verify everything, Chen said, though he was looking at David with new interest. Sir, if what you're saying is true, why didn't you just tell the store manager who you were? David let out a bitter laugh. Because I shouldn't have to. Because I should be able to walk into any store, in any building, whether I own it or not, and be treated like a human being. Because my identity as a property owner doesn't make me any more or less deserving of basic respect than anyone else. Rodriguez crossed his arms. That's all well and good, sir, but right now we have a store manager who called us because she felt threatened. We have to take that seriously. She felt threatened because of how I look, David said, his voice rising slightly despite his efforts to stay calm. Not because of anything I did. I never raised my voice until after she falsely accused me. I never made any threatening gestures. I was literally just standing here holding a shirt I wanted to buy. He was loitering, the manager interjected, standing in one spot for an unreasonably long time staring at expensive merchandise. I was looking at a watch, David exclaimed. In a store that sells watches? How is that loitering? Sir, I'm going to need you to lower your voice, Rodriguez warned. David took a deep breath, counting to 5 in his head. Getting angry would only make this worse. He knew that. But it was so incredibly frustrating to be in the right and still be treated like he was the problem. Officers, David said, forcing his voice back to a calm, measured tone. I understand you're doing your job. Someone called and you responded. That's fine, but I'm telling you the absolute truth. I came in here to shop. The manager profiled me based on my appearance and made assumptions about who I am and what I can afford. When I didn't leave on her command, she called you. That's what happened. And I'm telling you he's lying, the manager countered. My instincts are never wrong. I know when someone is up to no good. Your instincts are based on prejudice, David said, looking directly at her. Admit it. You took one look at me and decided I didn't belong here. That's not true, the manager sputtered, though her face suggested otherwise. I treat everyone equally. Really? Do you follow all your customers around the store? Do you question whether all of them can afford to shop here? Do you call the police on everyone who takes more than 5 minutes to look at merchandise? The manager opened her mouth but couldn't seem to find words. Officer Chen cleared his throat. Look, Mr. Johnson, if you really own this building, let's verify that and we can all move on. Where's your car? In the parking garage across the street, David replied. But I'm not leaving this store to go get documents. If I step outside, she'll probably try to claim I'm fleeing the scene or something. Rodriguez sighed heavily. Fine. Chen, go with him to get his documents. I'll stay here. No, David said firmly. Call my property manager. Her number is in my phone. Or better yet, call the management office for this building. They can confirm everything. We don't take orders from you, sir, Rodriguez said, his patience clearly wearing thin. I'm not giving orders, David said. I'm suggesting a solution that doesn't involve me going anywhere, so there's no confusion about me trying to leave or resist or whatever other accusations might come up. Officer Chen pulled out his phone. What's your property manager's number? David rattled off Linda's cell phone number from memory. Chen dialed and put the phone on speaker. It rang 3 times before a professional female voice answered. Linda Torres. Ms. Torres, this is Officer Chen with the City Police Department. I'm here with a man who claims to be David Johnson and says he owns the building at 445 Commerce Street. Can you confirm his identity? There was a pause. Is David okay? What's going on? Ma'am, just answer the question, please. Do you work for David Johnson? Yes, I'm his property manager. We've worked together for almost 8 years. David, what's happening? Are you in trouble? I'm fine, Linda, David called out toward the phone. Just dealing with a situation at one of our properties. Can you describe Mr. Johnson for me? Chen asked. He's 6 feet tall, African-American. Usually dresses pretty casually, even though he could buy and sell most people in designer clothes if he wanted to, Linda said with a slight laugh that quickly died when she realized this was serious. He has a small scar above his right eyebrow from a basketball accident when he was a kid. Why, what's this about? Chen looked at David, then at the scar above his eyebrow. Rodriguez moved closer to examine it too. The store manager's confident posture was starting to crumble. And does Mr. Johnson own the building at 445 Commerce Street? Chen continued. Yes, through his LLC. He's owned that property for about 4 years now. It's a mixed-use building with retail on the ground floor and offices above. We have several tenants there, including... Linda paused and you could hear papers shuffling. A boutique clothing store called Elegance Fashion. Why? Is there a problem with the building? The manager's face had gone from red to pale white. The assistant looked like she might faint. Rodriguez and Chen exchanged meaningful glances. No problem with the building, ma'am, Chen said. Thank you for confirming. We'll be in touch if we need anything else. Wait, is David... Chen ended the call before Linda could finish her question. An uncomfortable silence filled the store. Even with the property manager confirming everything, the atmosphere in the store remained tense. David could see the officers weren't quite sure how to proceed now that their suspicious person had turned out to be the building owner. The store manager looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole, but she wasn't backing down yet. Officers, she said, her voice slightly shaky but still trying to sound authoritative. Even if he does own the building, he was still making me uncomfortable. I have the right to refuse service to anyone in my store. David couldn't believe what he was hearing. You're seriously still trying to justify this? Ma'am, Officer Chen said carefully. If Mr. Johnson owns the property, this could be a civil matter between landlord and tenant, not a criminal issue. The manager's eyes widened. But he was trespassing. I asked him to leave my store and he refused. You can't trespass in a building you own, David pointed out, his patience completely exhausted. And even if I was just a regular customer, I hadn't done anything wrong. You can't just kick people out because you don't like how they look. Officer Rodriguez stepped between them. All right. Everyone needs to calm down. Mr. Johnson, perhaps it would be best if you left for now and handled this matter through proper channels. Contact your attorney, review the lease agreement. Are you serious right now? David interrupted, his voice rising despite his best efforts to stay calm. You're still asking me to leave? After everything that just happened? Sir, we're trying to de-escalate the situation. Rodriguez replied firmly. The situation wouldn't need de-escalating if you had listened to me from the beginning, instead of automatically believing I was the problem. David's frustration was finally breaking through. I told you I did nothing wrong. I told you what really happened. But you didn't care because you looked at me and made the same assumption she did. Chen held up his hands. Mr. Johnson, that's not fair. We were responding to a call, and you immediately treated me like a criminal. David cut him off. You told me to put my phone down. You put your hands near your weapons. You didn't ask for my side of the story first. You just assumed the white store manager was telling the truth and the black customer was lying. The words hung in the air like an accusation, which is exactly what they were. The officers shifted uncomfortably, but neither could deny what David was saying. "This is ridiculous," the manager interjected. "I'm the victim here." "I was scared." "You were scared of what?" David turned to face her. "A man shopping? A man minding his own business? Or were you scared because I didn't look like your usual customers? Because I didn't fit your narrow definition of who belongs in a place like this?" The assistant, who had been silent through most of this, suddenly spoke up in a quiet voice. "He really didn't do anything, Mrs. Peterson. He was just looking at clothes." The manager, Mrs. Peterson, whipped around to face her employee. "Jessica, don't you dare." "I'm sorry, but it's true," Jessica said, her voice getting a tiny bit stronger. He was polite. "He didn't touch anything roughly. He didn't threaten anyone. You're the one who got upset." Mrs. Peterson's face turned bright red. "You're fired." "You can't fire her for telling the truth," David said immediately. "I can fire her for whatever I want." Mrs. Peterson snapped. "This is my store." "Actually," David said coldly, "it's my store. You just rent the space. And if we're going to talk about lease violations, discriminating against customers is a pretty serious one." Mrs. Peterson's eyes went wide. "You can't. You wouldn't try me," David said. "I have video evidence of what happened here. I have a witness who just confirmed I did nothing wrong, and I have 2 police officers who can testify to what they found when they arrived." Officer Rodriguez stepped forward. "Mr. Johnson, making threats isn't going to help." "It's not a threat, it's a fact," David interrupted. "I'm simply pointing out the reality of the situation. This woman racially profiled me, falsely accused me of criminal behavior, called the police on me for doing nothing but shopping, and now she's trying to fire an employee for telling the truth. Those are all lease violations. Those are all grounds for eviction." The reality of what David was saying was clearly sinking in for Mrs. Peterson. Her store, her livelihood, everything she had built here was suddenly in jeopardy because of her own actions. I didn't mean," she stammered. "This is all a big misunderstanding." "No," David said firmly. "This is not a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding is when someone accidentally gives you the wrong change. A misunderstanding is when someone calls you by the wrong name. What you did was deliberate. You looked at me, made a judgment based on my skin color and clothing, and treated me like a criminal. I didn't." Mrs. Peterson tried to protest, but David wasn't done. "Do you know how humiliating this is? To be treated like a thief in your own property? To have the police called on you for shopping? To be told you don't belong somewhere when you literally own the place?" David's voice was thick with emotion now. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened to me. It's not even the 10th time, but it needs to be one of the last because I'm tired. I'm tired of proving my worth. I'm tired of defending my right to exist in spaces that people like you think belong only to people like you." The store was completely silent except for David's words. Even the officers seemed affected by the raw honesty of what he was saying. "I have worked my entire life to build something," David continued. "I grew up poor. Really poor. My mom cleaned houses to keep food on the table. My dad worked 3 jobs. They sacrificed everything so I could go to college. And I studied hard. Business, real estate, finance. I learned everything I could. I saved every penny. I took risks. I worked 18-hour days. I built a company from nothing." His voice cracked slightly. "And for what? So I can still be treated like I don't deserve to be here? So I can still be followed in stores and questioned by police and looked at with suspicion everywhere I go?" Mrs. Peterson was crying now, though whether from shame or self-pity was unclear. Jessica was crying too, her hands covering her face. Even Officer Chen looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Mr. Johnson," Rodriguez said quietly, "I think everyone understands your frustration." "Frustration?" David let out a harsh laugh. "This isn't frustration, officer. This is exhaustion. This is the weight of having to constantly prove you're not what people assume you are. This is knowing that no matter how successful you become, there will always be someone who sees you as less than human." He turned back to Mrs. Peterson. "You didn't see a customer today. You didn't see a person. You saw a stereotype. You saw your own fear and prejudice reflected back at you, and you decided to act on it. You decided to call men with guns to deal with someone whose only crime was existing in your presence." "I'm sorry," Mrs. Peterson whispered, though the apology felt hollow and too late. "Are you?" David challenged. "Are you sorry for what you did, or are you sorry you got caught?" Are you sorry you treated me like garbage? Or are you sorry that the garbage turned out to own the dumpster? No one had an answer for that. David looked down at the blue shirt still draped over his arm. He had come in here to buy clothes for a business meeting. Such a simple, normal thing. And it had turned into this nightmare. He looked at the shirt for a long moment, then carefully folded it and placed it on the nearest display table. I don't want your shirt, he said quietly. I don't want anything from this store. He pulled out his phone and made a call. It rang twice before a professional voice answered. Thompson Legal Group, how may I direct your call? This is David Johnson. I need to speak with Kenneth Thompson. It's urgent. One moment, Mr. Johnson. Everyone in the store watched as David waited. The officers exchanged glances. Mrs. Peterson had gone completely pale. Jessica was still crying silently behind the counter. David? A male voice came through the phone. What's going on? Ken, I need you to start eviction proceedings on the boutique store at the Commerce Street property. I'll send you the details, but I want them out as soon as legally possible. And I'll need you to review the security footage from today for a potential discrimination lawsuit. Mrs. Peterson let out a small gasp. Got it, Kenneth replied. All business. I'll start the paperwork immediately. Anything else? Yeah, David said, looking directly at the two police officers. I'm also going to need you to file a complaint with the police department. Racial profiling, improper response to a call, potential violation of my civil rights. The whole package, Rodriguez stepped forward. Now hold on. I'm not doing anything illegal, officer, David said calmly. I'm exercising my rights as a citizen and a property owner. David, I can be there in 20 minutes, Kenneth said through the phone. Don't say anything else without me present. Already said everything I needed to say, David replied. See you soon. He ended the call and looked around the store one more time. At Mrs. Peterson, who had destroyed her own business with her prejudice. At Jessica, who had finally found the courage to speak up but might pay for it anyway. At the two officers who had shown up ready to remove him without asking questions. I'm leaving now, David announced. Not because any of you have the right to make me leave, but because I choose to. Because staying in this place for one more second makes me sick to my stomach. David sat in his car for about 15 minutes before his phone started ringing. It was Linda, his property manager. He considered not answering, but she'd already been dragged into this situation. She deserved to know what was happening. Hey, Linda, he answered, his voice tired. David, what on earth is going on? The police called me asking about you owning the Commerce Street building. Are you okay? Her concern was genuine, and it actually made David feel a little better. I'm okay, he assured her. It's been a day. He explained everything that had happened. The shopping trip, Mrs. Peterson's accusations, the police being called, the humiliation of being treated like a criminal in his own building. Linda listened without interrupting, but he could hear her sharp intakes of breath at certain parts of the story. That's unbelievable, she said when he finished. Actually, no. It's completely believable, which is the sad part. David, I'm so sorry you went through that. Thanks. I've got Kenneth working on the eviction paperwork already. Good, Linda said firmly. That woman shouldn't be operating a business if she's going to discriminate against customers. Have you looked at the lease agreement recently? Because I'm pretty sure there's a clause about maintaining a discrimination-free establishment. There is, David confirmed. Kenneth will make sure everything is by the book. But Linda, I need you to do something for me. Anything. Pull all the security footage from the building today. The cameras in the hallway should have captured me entering the store. And I want to know if there have been any other complaints about that boutique. I'm already on it, Linda said. I pulled the footage as soon as I got off the phone with that officer. And I'm going through our complaint records now. Give me an hour and I'll have a full report for you and Kenneth. David smiled despite everything. This is why you're the best property manager in the city. Nah, I just hate injustice, Linda replied. And I really hate when good people get treated like dirt. You want me to come meet you? You shouldn't be alone right now. I appreciate it, but I'm okay. I'm going to head home, take a shower, and try to forget this morning ever happened. Impossible, but I understand the sentiment, Linda said. David, for what it's worth, you're handling this better than most people would. A lot of people would have gotten angry and made things worse. I did get angry, David admitted. Yeah, but you got angry in the right way. You used your words. You stood your ground, and you didn't give them any excuse to escalate things. That takes real strength. They talked for a few more minutes before hanging up. David started his car and was about to pull out when there was a knock on his window. He jumped, his heart racing for a moment before he saw it was just a young woman, maybe in her mid-20s with curly hair and kind eyes. He rolled down the window. "Can I help you?" "I'm sorry to bother you," she said quickly. "My name is Ashley. I was in the store earlier when all that started. I left before the police came because I had to get to work, but I wanted you to know that I saw everything. The way that manager treated you was disgusting, and if you need a witness or a statement or anything, I'll gladly provide one." David felt his throat tighten with emotion. Thank you. That means a lot." Ashley pulled out her phone. "I also got some video before I left. Just a few minutes of the manager following you around and making comments to her assistant. I didn't know if it would be useful, but I can send it to you if you want." "That would be incredibly helpful," David said, giving her his email address. "Can I ask why you're doing this?" "Most people don't want to get involved." Ashley's expression turned serious. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because my little brother is about your age, and he's had similar things happen to him. Every time I see something like this, I think about him and how scared he must feel in those moments. If someone had stepped up for him, maybe he wouldn't be so afraid all the time now." She sent the video and gave him her contact information in case his lawyer needed to reach her. After she left, David sat there watching the video on his phone. It was only about 3 minutes long, but it showed exactly what he had described. Mrs. Peterson following him through the store, pointing at him while whispering to Jessica, her hostile body language. It was all there, captured in HD. More evidence for the pile. David finally drove home, which was a modern condo in a nice part of town. He'd bought it 5 years ago when his business really started taking off. It was his sanctuary, the one place where he could truly relax and be himself without worrying about how others perceived him. He made it inside, locked the door, and finally allowed himself to break down. The anger, the humiliation, the exhaustion, it all came pouring out. He stood in his kitchen, hands braced against the counter, and let himself cry. Not because he was weak, but because holding it in any longer would have destroyed him from the inside. After about 10 minutes, he pulled himself together, washed his face, and made some coffee. His phone had been buzzing non-stop with messages. Most were from friends who had somehow already heard about what happened. News traveled fast in their community. His best friend Raymond called. "Man, I just saw a video on social media." "Was that really you at that boutique?" "Yeah," David confirmed. "It was me. Are you okay? Do you need me to come over?" "I'm all right. Just processing everything." Raymond was quiet for a moment.
"You know what gets me?
"You literally own that building. You've probably forgotten more about real estate than most people will ever know. You've got money, success, property, all the things they say will protect you. And it still didn't matter." "Nope," David agreed. "It didn't matter at all." "That's what I tell young people and they never believe me," Raymond continued. "They think if they just work hard enough, get educated enough, make enough money, they'll be safe. But that's not how it works." "I know," David said quietly. "Believe me, I know." They talked for a while longer before Raymond had to go. David spent the next few hours responding to messages, talking to Kenneth about the legal strategy, and reviewing the footage Linda had sent over. The security cameras had captured him entering the building, walking calmly into the store and later being escorted out by police. Nothing in his behavior looked even remotely suspicious or threatening. Linda had also uncovered something interesting. There had been 3 informal complaints about the boutique over the past year, all from customers of color who felt they'd been treated poorly. None of them had filed official complaints because they didn't think anything would come of it. But Linda had documented them all in her notes. "This is a pattern," Kenneth said when David called him with the information, "not just a one-time incident. That strengthens your case significantly." Evening came and David's phone rang with an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Johnson?" It was a woman's voice, professional but warm. "My name is Monica Harrison. I'm a reporter with Channel 7 News. I heard about what happened to you today, and I'd like to interview you about it." David hesitated. Going public with this would make everything more complicated, but it would also shine a light on the issue. "What angle are you planning to take with this story?" he asked carefully. "The truth," Monica replied. "Racial profiling, discriminatory practices, and how even successful people of color aren't immune to prejudice. I've been covering civil rights issues for 15 years, Mr. Johnson. I'm not interested in sensationalizing your pain. I'm interested in telling a story that needs to be told. David thought about it. About Ashley and her brother. About the 3 other customers who had complained but didn't think anyone would listen. About all the other people who would walk into stores tomorrow and face the same discrimination. Okay, he said finally. Let's do the interview. Thank you. Can we meet tomorrow afternoon? They arranged a time and place. After hanging up, David felt both nervous and determined. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about something bigger. His phone buzzed with a text from Linda. News is spreading fast. Just got calls from 3 other tenants in the building expressing support for you. Also, Mrs. Peterson's lawyer called. She wants to negotiate. David typed back, "What does she want to negotiate?" Linda's response came quickly. "She's asking if you'll reconsider the eviction in exchange for a public apology and sensitivity training for her staff." David stared at the message for a long moment. Part of him wanted to refuse immediately. Why should he make this easy for her? She had humiliated him, endangered him by calling the police, and only now cared because it was affecting her business. But another part of him wondered if there was a better way to handle this. An eviction would hurt her financially, sure, but would it actually change anything? Would it prevent the next Mrs. Peterson from doing the same thing to someone else? He called Kenneth back. "Mrs. Peterson wants to negotiate. What do you think?" "Legally, we have her dead to rights," Kenneth said. "Multiple lease violations, documented pattern of discrimination, everything we need. But this is your call, David. What do you want to come out of this?" That was the question, wasn't it? What did he want? "I want her to understand what she did wrong," David said slowly. "I want her to actually change, not just say sorry because she has to. And I want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." The next morning, David woke up to find his phone blowing up with notifications. The story had gone viral overnight. Several people who had been in the crowd outside the store had posted their videos on social media, and the hashtag Justice for David was trending locally. He scrolled through the comments while drinking his coffee. Most were supportive, sharing their own stories of being profiled or discriminated against. But there were also the usual negative comments questioning why he was making such a big deal out of it, or suggesting he must have done something to deserve that treatment. Those comments stung. But David had learned long ago that you couldn't convince everyone. Some people would never understand because they'd never experienced it themselves and had no desire to develop empathy. His doorbell rang at exactly 9 o'clock. It was Kenneth, his lawyer, arriving with a briefcase full of documents and a determined expression. "Ready for battle?" Kenneth asked as David let him in. "As ready as I'll ever be," David replied. "Coffee?" "Always." They sat at David's dining room table and went over everything. The lease agreement, the discrimination complaints, the video evidence, the witness statements. Kenneth had been busy overnight, building an airtight case. "Mrs. Peterson's lawyer called me this morning," Kenneth said. 3 times, actually. They're desperate to settle this without it going public any more than it already has. "Too late for that," David noted, gesturing to his phone where another notification had just popped up. "It's already everywhere." "Which works in our favor," Kenneth said. "Public pressure is on our side. But David, before we go any further, I need to know what you really want from this. Revenge, justice, change, all 3? David thought carefully before answering. "I want accountability. I want Mrs. Peterson to face real consequences for what she did. But more than that, I want to make sure this doesn't keep happening, not just in that store, but everywhere." "That's a tall order," Kenneth warned. "We can handle the legal stuff, the eviction, the potential lawsuit, the police complaint. But changing society? That's bigger than one case." "I know," David said. "But we have to start somewhere, right?" Kenneth smiled. "All right then. Let's make some waves." At 2 o'clock that afternoon, David met with Monica Harrison, the reporter from Channel 7 News. She brought a camera crew and set up in a local park that David had suggested. Neutral territory, public space, natural lighting. Monica was professional but compassionate, which David appreciated. "Mr. Johnson, thank you for agreeing to speak with us," she began once the cameras were rolling. "Can you walk us through what happened yesterday?" David told the story from beginning to end. He kept his voice calm and factual, letting the events speak for themselves. When he got to the part about being accused of having stolen credit cards, Monica's expression darkened. "And how did that make you feel?" she asked. "Honestly, small," David admitted. "Despite everything I've accomplished, despite the fact that I literally owned the building I was standing in, In that moment, I felt powerless. Like nothing I had done in my life mattered because someone looked at me and saw only their own prejudices. You mentioned you own the building. Can you tell us about your business? David explained his background. Growing up poor, working multiple jobs, putting himself through college, starting his real estate company, building it slowly but steadily over 15 years. He now owned 12 properties in the city, employed over 30 people, and contributed significantly to the local economy. None of that protected you yesterday, Monica observed. No, David agreed. And that's what people need to understand. This isn't about economic class. This isn't about education or success. This is about how people perceive you based on the color of your skin. I could have been wearing a three-piece suit and carrying a briefcase, and I still might have been profiled. But I was in gym clothes, which apparently was all the evidence Mrs. Peterson needed to decide I was a criminal. Monica asked about the police response, and David was careful with his words. He wasn't anti-police, but he was against bad policing. The officer showed up already convinced I was the problem, he explained. They didn't ask for my side first. They positioned themselves defensively, hands near weapons. They took the store manager's word as gospel without questioning whether maybe, just maybe, I was telling the truth. And that's a systemic issue. When police automatically side with white accusers against black people, it creates a dangerous dynamic. What do you want to come out of this situation? Monica asked. I want people to think before they judge, David said. I want store owners and managers to examine their own biases and treat every customer with respect. I want police to approach situations with an open mind instead of assumptions. And I want other people who've experienced this to know they're not alone, and they have the right to speak up. The interview lasted about 30 minutes. When it was over, Monica thanked him and said it would air that evening on the 6 o'clock news. David went home and prepared himself. He knew once the interview aired, things were going to escalate. His phone was already ringing constantly with interview requests from other media outlets, messages from supporters, and surprisingly, several messages from other business owners of color sharing similar experiences. One message in particular stood out. It was from a young woman named Keisha, who owned a small tech startup. She wrote, "Last month I was in a business meeting with potential investors. I'm the CEO and founder, but they kept addressing all their questions to my white male assistant, assuming he was in charge. When he corrected them, they seemed shocked. Your story reminded me that this happens at every level. Thank you for speaking up." David responded to as many messages as he could, offering support and encouragement. By 5:30, he had a small group gathered in his living room. Linda was there along with Raymond, Kenneth, and a few other close friends. They ordered pizza and settled in to watch the news together. The story was the lead segment. Monica had done an excellent job editing it, including not just David's interview but also the video footage from inside and outside the store. She had even managed to get brief statements from some of the other customers who had witnessed the incident. But the real impact came from Ashley's video. The footage of Mrs. Peterson following David, her suspicious looks, her whispered comments to Jessica, it was damning. You could see clearly that David was doing nothing wrong, just browsing like any normal customer, while Mrs. Peterson treated him like a shoplifter. The segment ended with Monica's commentary. This incident raises important questions about racial profiling in retail spaces and the assumptions we make about who belongs where. David Johnson's experience is not unique, but his willingness to speak about it publicly may help spark the conversations we need to have about bias, discrimination, and justice. David's phone exploded immediately. Text messages, social media notifications, calls from friends and strangers alike. The story was being shared thousands of times within minutes. But not everyone was supportive. David's social media accounts were flooded with hateful comments and messages. People calling him a race baiter, accusing him of playing the victim, saying he was just trying to get attention or money. Some of the messages were genuinely threatening. "You okay?" Raymond asked, seeing David's expression as he scrolled through some particularly vile comments. "Yeah," David said, though his jaw was tight. Just reminded that progress comes with pushback. Linda looked over his shoulder and gasped at one particularly offensive message. "That's horrible. You should report these." "I am," David assured her. "Kenneth's team is documenting everything in case we need it later." Kenneth's phone rang. He stepped into the other room to answer it, then came back with an interesting expression. That was Mrs. Peterson's lawyer again. She's seen the news coverage and wants to meet tomorrow, face to face. Oh, does she want to apologize? David asked skeptically. He didn't say specifically, just that she wants a chance to explain herself and find a resolution. David looked around at his friends, all of whom had opinions written all over their faces. Raymond was shaking his head no. Linda looked conflicted. Kenneth maintained his professional neutrality. What do you think I should do? David asked the room. I think she doesn't deserve your time, Raymond said immediately. She showed you who she is. Believe her. But what if she's genuine? Linda countered. What if she really wants to make things right? Then she can make things right by accepting the eviction and moving on, Raymond argued. David doesn't owe her anything. This isn't about what David owes her, Kenneth interjected. It's about what outcome David wants. If he meets with her, he might get closure. Or he might just get more frustrated. But either way, it's his choice. David was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Finally, he said, I'll meet with her. But not alone and not on her terms. She comes to my office with her lawyer, and we have a mediated conversation with Kenneth present. If she's serious about making amends, she can do it properly. Kenneth nodded. I'll set it up. The rest of the evening was spent fielding calls and messages. David did 2 more phone interviews with local radio stations and one with a national podcast that focused on social justice issues. He was exhausted by the time everyone left around midnight, but he couldn't sleep. His mind was racing with everything that had. 2 weeks had passed since the incident at the boutique, and David's life had changed in ways he never anticipated. What started as a humiliating experience had transformed into a movement, and he found himself at the center of it whether he was ready or not. His phone rang constantly with interview requests, speaking invitations and messages from people sharing their own stories. The local community had rallied around him in an overwhelming show of support, but David knew that support alone wouldn't create lasting change. Action was needed. That's why he was sitting in a conference room at City Hall with 15 other community leaders, business owners, and activists. The mayor had called the meeting to discuss concrete steps the city could take to address discrimination in retail spaces. Mr. Johnson, the mayor said, your experience has opened a lot of eyes in this community, but I think we all agree that awareness alone isn't enough. We need policies, procedures, and accountability measures. What do you think those should look like? David had spent days preparing for this moment. He pulled out a folder of notes he'd compiled with help from Kenneth, Linda, and several advocacy groups. First, David began, we need mandatory anti-bias training for all retail business owners and managers in the city. Not just a one-time session, but ongoing education that's updated regularly, and it can't be some check-the-box exercise. It needs to be meaningful, with real scenarios and accountability built in. Several people around the table nodded. One business owner raised her hand. Who pays for that training? A lot of small businesses are struggling as it is. The city could offer subsidies or grants, David suggested. Make it affordable but mandatory. Because the cost of discrimination, both to the people who experience it and to the community as a whole, is far greater than the cost of training. Agreed, the mayor said, making notes. What else? Second, we need a clear reporting system for discrimination complaints. Right now, if someone experiences what I experienced, they don't really know where to turn. There should be a city office or hotline dedicated to handling these complaints, investigating them, and taking action when necessary. Like a civil rights commission? Someone asked. Exactly, David confirmed. With real authority to investigate, mediate, and when necessary, recommend sanctions against businesses that violate anti-discrimination policies. A councilwoman spoke up. That's going to be controversial. Business owners will say it's government overreach, and discriminated customers will say it's necessary protection, David countered. We have health inspectors for restaurants to protect physical health. Why not have similar oversight to protect civil rights? The discussion continued for over 2 hours. They talked about everything from diversifying business ownership to creating incentives for companies that demonstrated inclusive practices. David shared the terms he'd negotiated with Mrs. Peterson as an example of what accountability could look like. You mentioned a scholarship fund, the mayor noted. What if we expanded that concept citywide? What if businesses that had documented discrimination incidents were required to contribute to a community fund that supported education and business opportunities for underrepresented groups? David liked that idea. It turns a negative into something positive. It creates consequences that actually benefit the community, rather than just punishing the business. By the end of the meeting, they had outlined a comprehensive plan. It would take time to implement, and there would surely be resistance, but it was a start. The mayor promised to present the proposals to the city council within the month. As David left City Hall, he was approached by a young man who had been waiting outside. He looked nervous, clutching a notebook to his chest. "Mr. Johnson, I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Tyler. I'm a journalism student, and I've been following your story. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions for my thesis project." David checked his watch. He had a meeting with Linda in 30 minutes, but something about the young man's earnest expression made him pause. "Sure, I've got a few minutes. What's your thesis about?" Tyler's face lit up. "I'm studying how social media activism translates into real-world change. Your case is a perfect example. You went from being a victim of discrimination to sparking a citywide reform movement in just 2 weeks. How did that happen?" They sat on a bench outside City Hall, and David thought about the question. "Honestly, I don't think I did anything special. I just told the truth about what happened to me. Other people amplified that truth because it resonated with their own experiences. The change isn't coming from me alone. It's coming from everyone who decided they'd had enough. But you're the face of this movement now," Tyler pointed out. "How does that feel? Is it a lot of pressure?" "It's terrifying," David admitted. "I'm not a professional activist or a civil rights leader. I'm just a guy who got profiled while shopping. But I've learned that sometimes ordinary people end up in extraordinary situations, and you have a choice. You can retreat and try to forget it happened, or you can use your experience to try to make things better for others." Tyler scribbled notes furiously. "What would you say to other people who experience discrimination, but don't feel like they have the platform or resources to fight back?" David considered this carefully. "I'd say your voice matters even if you don't have a big platform. Document what happens to you. Tell your story to friends, family, on social media, wherever people will listen. File complaints with the business, with the Better Business Bureau, with civil rights organizations, and know that you're not alone. There are people and groups who will support you if you reach out." They talked for a few more minutes before David had to leave for his meeting with Linda. As he walked to his car, he thought about Tyler's questions. The young man was right. David had become the face of this movement, and that came with responsibilities he was still learning to navigate. Linda was waiting in her office when David arrived. She had news. "I've been getting calls from other property owners," she told him. "They want to know how to implement the same requirements you set for Mrs. Peterson in their own buildings. Some are asking if you'd consult with them on creating anti-discrimination policies for their tenants." David was surprised. "Really? Really? What you did with Mrs. Peterson's lease has gotten attention in the property management community. People see it as a smart way to protect both tenants and landlords from discrimination liability. That's actually really good," David said. "It means the impact is spreading beyond just one store." "There's more," Linda continued. "I got a call from the Commercial Real Estate Association. They want you to speak at their annual conference about inclusive business practices and property management." David laughed in disbelief. "A month ago, I couldn't shop without being harassed. Now they want me to speak at conferences?" "Your perspective is valuable," Linda said seriously. "You understand both sides. You're a property owner and a person who experiences discrimination. That's a unique position." Over the next few weeks, David found himself doing things he never imagined. He spoke at the real estate conference, sharing his story and offering practical advice on creating inclusive lease agreements and tenant requirements. He consulted with several property management companies on their policies. He even started a small nonprofit focused on supporting minority business owners who had experienced discrimination. The nonprofit was Raymond's idea. "You've got momentum right now," Raymond had told him. "Use it to build something lasting, something that'll help people long after the headlines fade." David called the nonprofit Fair Chance Initiative. Its mission was threefold: provide legal support to people experiencing discrimination, offer resources and education to businesses wanting to improve their practices, and create opportunities for minority entrepreneurs. Jessica became one of the first people the initiative helped. She decided not to return to Mrs. Peterson's store, and David connected her with one of his other tenants who was looking for a manager for their new location. Jessica was thriving in her new role, and she'd become an advocate herself, sharing her experience and encouraging others to speak up against workplace discrimination. The initiative's launch got significant media attention. Within a week, they had received donations from local businesses and individuals, and had already started working on their first few cases. One involved a Black-owned restaurant that had been denied a business loan despite having excellent credit and a solid business plan. Another involved a Latina woman who had been followed around a store by security, despite being a regular customer. David was stretched thin between running his property business and managing the initiative, but he'd never felt more purposeful. This was bigger than just his own experience now. It was about creating systemic change. One evening, David got a call from an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Is this David Johnson?" a woman's voice asked. She sounded older, maybe in her 70s. "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is Dorothy Matthews. You don't know me, but I wanted to thank you for what you're doing. 50 years ago, I went through something similar to what happened to you. I was shopping for a dress for my college graduation, and the store manager accused me of stealing and called the police. They arrested me right there in the store. I spent 3 months had passed since that day at the boutique, and David's life had settled into a new normal. The media attention had mostly died down, though he still did occasional interviews. The Fair Chance Initiative was growing steadily, having helped over 30 people and businesses navigate discrimination issues. And the changes he'd helped spark in the city were starting to take root. David stood in front of what used to be Mrs. Peterson's boutique, but the space looked completely different now. The windows were no longer covered with paper. Instead, they displayed colorful signs announcing the grand opening of New Beginnings Community Hub. This was David's next project, and he was both nervous and excited about it. After months of negotiation, Mrs. Peterson had decided to close her boutique for good. The controversy had been too much, and despite her efforts to make amends, many customers never returned. She'd broken her lease early, and David had to decide what to do with the empty space. He could have leased it to another retail store. He could have turned it into office space. But Raymond had suggested something better. "Turn it into a community resource center," Raymond had said. "A place that actually serves the community instead of excluding parts of it." David loved the idea immediately. He'd spent the last 2 months transforming the space into a community hub that offered several services. Part of it was a small business incubator, where aspiring entrepreneurs could get free consulting, office space, and resources. Another section housed a satellite office for the Fair Chance Initiative. There was also a community meeting room available for local groups to use free of charge. But David's favorite part was the storefront itself. He'd turned it into a retail showcase where local minority-owned businesses could display and sell their products. Each month, different businesses would rotate through, getting exposure and sales opportunities they might not otherwise have. Patricia's boutique had the first spot, along with a Black-owned bookstore, a Latino-owned art gallery, and an Asian-owned tea company. The grand opening was scheduled for this afternoon, and David had invited everyone who had been part of his journey. Linda was there, of course, helping coordinate everything. Kenneth had taken time off from his law practice to attend. Jessica was working at the front desk. David had hired her as the hub's community coordinator. Raymond arrived with his wife and kids. Tyler, the journalism student, was there with his camera, documenting the opening for his thesis project. Ashley showed up with her brother, the one she'd mentioned who had experienced similar discrimination. Even Monica Harrison from Channel 7 News came to cover the opening, and Dorothy Matthews was there. The woman who had called David months ago to thank him. They'd stayed in touch, and she'd become something of a mentor to him, sharing wisdom from her decades of quietly fighting against discrimination in her own ways. "This is beautiful, David," Dorothy said, looking around the space with tears in her eyes. "You took a place that represented exclusion and turned it into a symbol of inclusion." "That's powerful," David hugged her. "I couldn't have done any of this without all the people who supported me. This isn't my accomplishment, it's ours." The mayor arrived for the ribbon-cutting ceremony, along with several city council members. The reforms David had pushed for were being implemented citywide. Mandatory anti-bias training had started for retail businesses. The Civil Rights Commission was up and running, having already processed over 50 complaints. and the city had launched a grant program to support minority-owned businesses. When David Johnson walked into that boutique 3 months ago, the mayor said in her speech, he was just trying to buy a shirt. What happened to him that day was wrong, unacceptable, and unfortunately not uncommon. But instead of letting that incident defeat him, David chose to fight for change. And because of his courage and leadership, our city is better today than it was 3 months ago. The crowd applauded. David stepped up to cut the ribbon, flanked by Dorothy on one side and Jessica on the other. As the ribbon fell away and people streamed into the hub, David felt a profound sense of accomplishment mixed with humility. This wasn't the end of discrimination or prejudice. Those problems were much bigger than one person or one community hub could solve, but it was a start. It was proof that change was possible when people decided to act instead of accepting the status quo. Throughout the afternoon, David watched people explore the space. Young entrepreneurs excitedly discussing business plans in the incubator area, families browsing products from local businesses, community groups booking the meeting room for their gatherings. This was what he'd envisioned, a space that brought people together instead of pushing them apart. Tyler interviewed several attendees for his project. One woman told him, "I've lived in this neighborhood for 20 years and I've never felt welcome in most of these stores. But this place? This feels like it's actually for us." That comment summed up exactly what David had hoped to achieve. As the day wound down and the crowd thinned, David found himself standing in the spot where he'd been that day 3 months ago, right in front of the watch display case that no longer existed. He thought about how much had changed since then. Linda walked up beside him. "You doing okay?" "Yeah," David said, just thinking about everything. About how one bad day turned into all this. It wasn't just a bad day, Linda reminded him. It was a symptom of a much larger problem. You just happened to be in a position to do something about it. "Do you think Mrs. Peterson really changed?" David asked. It was a question that still bothered him sometimes. Linda considered it. "I don't know if we can ever really know what's in someone's heart. But I know she's living up to the terms of your agreement. I know she's been attending community events and trying to educate herself. Whether that's genuine transformation or just fear of consequences, the end result is the same. She's not discriminating against customers anymore." "I guess that's what matters," David agreed. "The behavior more than the motivation." "Speaking of Mrs. Peterson," Linda said, pulling out her phone. "She sent you an email today. Said she saw the announcement about the hub opening and wanted to share something with you." David read the email on Linda's phone. Mrs. Peterson had written about her journey over the past 3 months, the training she'd done, the books she'd read, the conversations she'd had with people from different backgrounds. She acknowledged that she still had work to do, but she was committed to doing it. At the end, she wrote, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness and I'm not asking for it. But I want you to know that what happened that day changed my life, not because of the consequences I faced, but because you held up a mirror and made me see who I had become. I was a person who treated another human being as less than human, and I have to live with that. The best I can do now is make sure I never do it again and try to help others avoid making the same mistakes. Thank you for giving me a chance to be better." David handed the phone back to Linda. "That's probably the most honest thing she's ever said to me." "Are you glad you gave her a second chance?" Linda asked. "I don't know," David admitted. "Ask me in a year. If she's still keeping up with everything and hasn't had any more incidents, then maybe. But I'm learning that grace and accountability aren't opposites. You can hold people accountable while still leaving room for redemption." Raymond walked over with his youngest daughter, a bright-eyed 7-year-old named Zoe. "Uncle David, my daddy says you're a hero." "Are you really a hero?" David knelt down to Zoe's level. "I'm not a hero, sweetheart. I'm just someone who tried to do the right thing." "But you helped lots of people," Zoe insisted. "My teacher says helping people makes you a hero." "Your teacher is very smart," David said. "But the truth is, lots of people helped make all this happen. Your dad helped me. Miss Linda helped me. So many people work together. We're all heroes when we help each other." Zoe seemed satisfied with that answer and ran off to explore the hub with her siblings. Raymond smiled. "She's not wrong, you know. You are a hero to a lot of people." "I'm just a guy who wouldn't leave a store when someone told me to," David joked. "No," Raymond said seriously. "You're a guy who stood up for his dignity when it would have been easier to walk away. You're a guy who turned personal pain into community progress. That's heroic, whether you want to admit it or not. As evening approached, the last visitors left the hub. David, Linda, Raymond, and Jessica stayed behind to clean up and lock up. As they worked, they talked about plans for the hub's future, about the clients the Fair Chance Initiative was helping, about the policy changes still needed in the city. You know what's crazy? Jessica said as she wiped down tables. 3 months ago, I was terrified to speak up. I thought telling the truth would ruin my life. But it actually saved it. I'm happier now than I've ever been. That's because you were never going to be truly happy working for someone who expected you to compromise your integrity, David said. You did the right thing and the right opportunities followed. Jessica smiled.
I'm glad you think so.
Because I've been meaning to ask, do you think the hub could host some workshops on workplace rights? So other young people like me know what to do when they see something wrong? That's a fantastic idea, Linda said immediately. We could partner with some employment lawyers, maybe some HR professionals.